welcome back to Oxford Archery Academy. Today we're in the workshop and we're going to look at how to cut arrows and how to fit points in them. It's also going to serve as a little bit of a review of the Decut Arrow Saw, which is one of the more affordable arrow saws that I'm sure a few of you are either looking at purchasing or have purchased already. It's got a couple of flaws, so I'm going to show you how to get around them and give you a little product review on the way. Alright, so before we go any further, let's have a look at the Decut Arrow Saw, see what we're dealing with. There are obviously lots of other arrow saws on the market, but they tend to be extremely expensive, not necessarily in the range of your average archer for home use. So I thought I'd have a look at this one, given that this is most likely to be the one that you have at home. So the adjustment on it is simple. The length adjustment is here. The inch markings are reasonably accurate. Not anything that is a problem. To get the shorter lengths cut, you can slide this bar out completely, invert it and slide it back in, which is what the upper range of measurements are for, and then the lower range are for having the length adjustment set this way around. So that's quite a good feature. It means that you can cut the shorter arrow lengths without any issues. Good if you've got juniors or maybe if you shoot crossbow. The Decut is on a European plug, so you will need to have a converter or you need to rewire it to be on a UK plug. Not necessarily a massive issue, but something to bear in mind. And it works on the sewing machine type pedal that most arrow saws work on. So you drop that on the floor, put it under your foot, so you can keep both hands free whilst you're doing the cutting. The blade itself is pretty good. Move that around so you can see it. Okay, so it's a nice thin blade, so you can have a smaller kerf, not lose too much arrow just to the width of the cut itself. That's quite a nice feature. You can buy new ones of these quite easily, so it's not anything proprietary, which is nice for keeping a sharp blade and a spare in your kit. That's all fine. The motor works fine. Nothing complicated in this part of the arrow saw, or rather any part of an arrow saw, but it's just a straightforward motor with a grinding cut-off wheel attached, so far so good. The problem with this arrow saw I have found is mostly at the opposite end, which is here. Hopefully you can see that there is this little U-shaped thing where the end of the arrow is meant to sit when you're doing your cutting. It's a very large cutout. As you can see, I can get my whole finger in that, which is fine if you're cutting larger diameter aluminium arrows, but for the smaller carbons, the bottom of the cutout is not steep enough to centre the carbon properly, centre the thin arrow properly. So I have found that unless you're very careful about keeping the pressure downwards at the back end as you cut, you can end up with a wonky cut. I've got around this to a certain extent by just cutting a little piece of foam that I can push into that recess and make the recess smaller with effectively. But I think longer term I'll probably cut into the bottom of this a deeper recess, more of a V shape, to keep the arrow actually set. So that's a bit of a downside to this saw. It's not particularly well thought through for cutting smaller diameter arrows, so you have to be a little bit careful when you're doing that. Okay, let's get it set up and crack on. So today I've been asked to cut a couple of sets of ACC carbon arrows, still a bit wet from their last use. The first thing we need to do obviously is remove the points, which you can do with a lighter if you've got one, or a chef's blowtorch is actually quite useful because that heats the points up quite quickly. So we're just going to rattle through and take these points out, then we can get on and set the length of the cutter. As well as your blowtorch or lighter, you're going to need a pair of pliers that have a circular cutout in them. That means you can hold the point more securely than you could in the flat of a plier. If you've not got these are Eastern pliers, not really necessary. If you've only got flat needle nose pliers, you can always file around out of the jaws quite easily, just with a little diamond file or even just a little metal cutting file. You can also do that, by the way, as a quick shortcut in a normal pair of pliers to make this little notch, which is used for tightening D-loops. So that's quite a good modification to make to your Leatherman pliers, for instance. Okay, so let's crack on and get these points out so we can cut. Make sure that you're only heating the point, not the carbon, as you do this. And you should quickly get a feel for how long your particular glue needs to heat up before the point will come out. If you're hearing background noises, I'm very sorry about that. That's a noisy parrot. He's having his morning constitutional. He's outside in his cage and he's very happy about the fact, so he's decided to be very noisy. Okay, that's the points out. Now let's move on to cutting. So the archer that I'm doing these for has asked for the arrows to be cut for 28¼ inches from the throat of the nock. So for those of you who don't know, the throat of the nock is the lower part there. I can't take my hand enough. There. So the nock where it meets the string, essentially. So 28¼ from there to the end of the shaft. So the problem is that when you're using an arrow cutter, you've obviously got the ears of the nock sat in the arrow cutter, as in the very end of the nock is sat in the arrow cutter, not the throat, which adds an extra bit of length. So I've transferred the measurement of 28¼ to the shaft and made a mark on the shaft instead. Which I can use to set the length without having to take the nocks out as well. So I'm going to slide that along. And tighten it up. What I'm doing is I'm just checking I'm happy with how the arrow is going to roll, because I've got, like I mentioned, that little piece of foam making sure that the arrow stays centered. So I need to make sure that it's going to roll smoothly and make a flat cut, which seems fine. Yeah, seems fine. Okay, so everything's set up, we're ready to go. Now obviously you need to know that you're cutting arrows, you're going to be creating dust. So make sure you're wearing the appropriate protective equipment to do this. If you're cutting carbon arrows, you need to be doing it with a mask on, or you're risking damaging your health quite severely. Do it in a well-ventilated space if you have access to a well-ventilated space, but certainly wear a mask, certainly wear eye protection, because carbon dust in your eyes and in your lungs is not fun. The same is actually true of aluminium arrows. When you're cutting those, they do also generate dust. It's heavier, so it doesn't get into your lungs as easily, but really you should be also taking protective measures when you cut those arrows too. Okay, let's get on with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the pedal, I'm going to let the blade come up to speed, and I'm going to push the shaft against the blade and I'm going to turn it as I cut, and I'm just aiming to cut through the wall of the arrow, not straight across the shaft. So I'm grinding through the wall and then I'm turning the shaft to feed the rest of the wall of the arrow onto the blade. Just like that. Then I like to inspect the cut and make sure that it's straight. It is straight, that's all fine. Sorry you couldn't see that out of shot. Yeah, the cut's straight and fine, but the blade is set a little bit too shallowly, so it's struggling to get all the way through the burr of the aluminium inside the carbon. So I'm just going to adjust this knob here to make the blade cut a little bit deeper through the arrow to address that problem. Alright, now we can crack on with the others. Right, so that's all 7 arrows in this case cut. Hope you liked the mask. Right, so you can see that after they've been cut, the arrows, hopefully you can see, I'm going to come in really close. There we go. The arrows have got like a little burr inside, a little flap of metal. That's pretty normal, like with how the cutting blade works. So what you need to do is remove that burr before you try and glue the points in. Take a knife that you don't much care about. So this is just a crappy stainless steel utility knife. Pop it inside and then turn the arrow, and what you'll find is the knife just abrades the burr off. So pop it in like that, where you can see me, like this, and then just turn the shaft, and you saw there the bit of metal fall out. Then if I come back to the camera, you can see that the burr is removed, and that means that the glue can properly adhere to the inside of the shaft without the burr being in the way. Let's go on and do the others. Okay, all done. Next thing is to glue the points back in. So let's clear the arrow saw out of the way first. So you'll be needing back your blowtorch or lighter, your pliers with the circular cutout so you can hold the points, obviously your points, and you'll be needing some hot melt glue. Now Eastern points sometimes come with a hot melt glue, which is more than adequate for the job, but if you have to buy your own separately, boning make that's boning with a H make 2 different colours, which indicate 2 different temperatures. So this clear one is a high temperature hot melt glue, which is for aluminium arrows, and then this blue one is a low temperature hot melt glue, which is better for carbon arrows. It doesn't tend to damage the carbon if it gets on the carbon. It's also good for pin knocks. The difficulty is this blue stuff, if you're shooting into straw, can actually get hot enough for the point to come out. So don't use that unless the archer that you're doing the work for, or in fact you yourself, are only shooting on foam. Okay, if you are at all in doubt, if you think that you might have to be shooting on straw, better to use the higher temperature stuff, which is what we will be doing now. So what you need to do is grip the point at the bottom of the shoulder rather than on the point itself in the rounded part of your pliers, like this. What we're going to be doing is heating the point and putting a little donut of glue right around the top part, so at this level, As we push the arrow onto the point, we're going to turn the shaft so that the glue is spread evenly as we push the shaft down. Then we're going to put the arrow straight away into a cup of water so it cools down quickly. The idea behind that is that you're putting a hot point into a cylinder in which the air will be sealed. If the air heats up and therefore expands before the glue is set, the point can pop out a little bit, which is annoying. You then have to go and reset all the points. So do make sure that you can cool the point down quickly to avoid that happening. This being the workshop and me doing a little bit of blacksmithing, I've actually got a quench bucket of water just out of shop, so that's what I'll be using. I prefer to use the lighter for this part just out of habit, but obviously use whatever you've got and whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm putting that donut of glue around the top. Point's still a little bit cool, so I'm going to come back and heat it again. This is a good lighter, by the way, for this purpose. It's a twin jet lighter. I think you can get them at Go Outdoors, that kind of thing. They're great for this kind of job. So when you push the arrow shaft on, make sure you turn it as you go, and then turn it as you go, and you'll get a little bit of leftover glue at the bottom. That shows you've used enough, and then immediately cool the point off screen in your cup of water. Then you should just be left with a little donut of glue that you can remove with your thumbnail. Like that. That's one arrow done. Pop it up there. Crack on with the rest. If you're wondering how much glue to put on, the answer is, forgive the rustiness of this point, these are not well cared for arrows. If you've got enough glue on, you'll get that little donut. You see that extra ridge of glue as you push the shaft down? If you don't get that donut, you've not got enough glue on. And that just comes off with your thumbnail, just like that, to leave a nice clean junction. There you go. Okay, so there we have it. All 7 arrows cut and repointed. Didn't take very long at all. Obviously not everybody's got access to an arrow saw, but these decut ones are reasonably priced, and provided that you are aware of the issue that I pointed out with the knock end, you can use them with a perfectly adequate degree of accuracy. Learn how to do it. Learn how to build your own arrows. Get control of your process. So that you can tweak it to your satisfaction, so that you can play with your arrow tuning by shortening them if you need to, by adding or removing point weight and refitting the points. Though archery shops are obviously great at building arrows for you, it's a really good thing as an archer to be able to have full control of the arrow building process, because then you know they're done to your satisfaction, and you know that you can make repairs in the field if you need to. So grab your glue, grab your pliers, crack on, and see you next time.